Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large. This is coming at you for show number 80 this week, and I have a special guest on, but first, some things to go over. You know, this topic this week is refugees, and that is not the same as immigration or illegal immigrants. It's related, but not the same, and these two things tend to get lumped together. And I thought we should take a good hard look at this subject of refugees because there's a lot of controversy about this. And I have to tell you that I have been spending quite a bit of time actually looking into the facts, the statistics, the actual numbers, and in this case, this week, as you'll hear later on in this episode, the actual people involved. And as with so many things, the truth is so different from the picture that is being painted by our politicians and being painted by our news media. And personally, this is actually starting to really annoy me, and annoy like in an angry way. Like, it should not be okay with you or me or anybody that we are lied to as often as we are and as blatantly as we are by our leaders, our politicians, if you want to call them our leaders. I don't call them that, but you know, the people who decide on policy and legislation for this country are blatant liars on this topic, and it is shocking just how bad some of those lies are. And the reason that it upsets me is because it creates an impression in far too many people's heads that there are dangerous terrorists who just are itching to get into this country and are going to use the refugee line to gain access. And when you get all the information and facts about what it takes to be a refugee, to get refugee status, to then make it to the United States, to resettle here, and the number of hurdles and difficulties and walls you have to climb, and the time involved, nothing could be further. I mean, it becomes ludicrous. The lies from the politicians and from the media become so outrageous that you wonder how anyone can deliver them with a straight face. It's that bad. It's like going on TV and saying today the sky is chartreuse green or something. I mean, it's just it's crazy weird how bold it is. I don't know. Clouds are made of cheese. So let us go into this a little bit. Now, one thing I'd like to say straight away is this line of extreme vetting is nothing but PR nonsense being pushed out by Trump, who's trying to look tough and talk tough completely unnecessarily, because as you'll find here, the line for people, and by the line I mean the procedures and routines, the things that people have to go through in order to be a refugee and arrive here are already so extreme and have been since 1980 that we don't need more extreme vetting, actually. We really don't. But let me talk about this a little bit. First off, I selected a few articles to read some things to you all from. First off, let's be very clear about who and what we are talking about when we use the word refugee. A refugee, and this is according to the American Immigration Council.org, a refugee is defined by Section 101A42 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA. You ever heard of that? I hadn't. Before I started looking into this. And a refugee is a person who is unable or unwilling to return to his or her home country because of a, quote, well-founded fear of persecution, end quote, due to race, membership in a particular social group, political opinion, religion, or national origin. And this definition comes out of the United Nations 1951 Convention and 1967 protocols relating to the status of refugees. There are something on the order of 16 million refugees worldwide, all over the world, from Southeast Asia to Russia to South America, Africa, and of course the Middle East. And we are accepting, more than many other countries. But when you look at the per capita ratios of how many are coming into the United States compared to the size of our population, 320 million people, it is a minuscule percentage of people that we are having come into the country through the refugee status or refugee program. Now, let's go over a few key facts about refugee numbers. And this is according to Pew Research. Historically, the total number of refugees coming to the U.S. has fluctuated along with global events and U.S. priorities. From 1990 to 1995, an average of about 112,000 refugees arrived each year. 112,000. That's a lot of people, but it's not anything exorbitant or insane. Dropped off to fewer than 27,000 in 2002, which of course was right after 9/11, and has been going up since. In fiscal year 2016, we accepted 84,995 refugees. So you'll notice that's less than what we were accepting back in the early 90s. The highest number of refugees in this last 2016 came from the Congo, about 16,000, followed by Syria, which is about 12,000, Burma, and Iraq, and then Somalia. And if you look at any photos of some of those countries and regions and places where people are coming from, you won't have a whole lot of question as to why they're getting the hell out of where they were living and trying to come here or trying to resettle elsewhere. And then we go in terms of raw numbers. 39,000 Muslim refugees entered the U.S. in 2016. And if any of you right now are thinking to yourself, oh my God, 39,000 Muslims, that must mean 39,000 terrorists, then may I please point out that you may possibly be having received a little bit too much fear-mongering. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now, and the reason why I'm going to damp and stamp and throw water on any fears, worries, concerns, or paranoia about these incoming refugees is because I actually went and looked up crime statistics having to do with refugees, specifically refugee crime rates. And here we have an article from October 2015 that says, the U.S. record shows refugees are not a threat. And this is from the Migration Policy Institute. And I'm just going to read a couple sections from this. Congress and others react to the Obama administration's announcement of the refugee resettlement program. They were raising the refugee quota from 70,000 to 85,000 a couple of years ago. And it says here, it would be a shame if the drive to allow the United States to play an even more meaningful role in a humanitarian protection system that is under severe strain, in part because of the Syrian crisis, it would be a shame if that were to become embroiled in a debate that is heavy on rhetoric and light on facts. The reality is this. The United States has resettled 784,000 refugees since September 11th, 2001. Okay, not even 1 million people. In those 14 years, exactly 3 resettled refugees have been arrested for planning terrorist activities. And it's worth noting 2 were not planning an attack in the United States, and the plans of the 3rd were barely credible. In fact, what these guys ended up being charged with was taking delivery of stolen cereal. So we're not talking about Gitmo candidates here. As the more than 4 million refugees who have spilled out of Syria overwhelm neighboring countries in Royal Europe, many Americans have been asking what more the United States can and should do to help cope with this crisis. Fewer than 2,000 Syrians have been resettled in this country since the Assad regime's crackdown on peaceful protest ignited a savage civil war in 2011. The most common arguments against resettling more Syrian refugees, made by some Republican presidential candidates and members of Congress, is that the resettlement program could be a path for infiltration into the United States by ISIS or other terrorists. But the refugee resettlement program is the least likely avenue for a terrorist to choose. And the reasons for that are what we are now going to go over in the rest of this show. And I think you're going to find by the end of this show that the facts speak for themselves. In this case, Joe Sack is a man who has been working for many, many years directly, hands-on, with refugees and bringing refugees into this country. He understands the exact vetting process. That is his job, is to do this process and to assist legal refugees, those who are actually worthy of it, of resettling here in the United States. And he's been doing this for a long time. I asked him a lot of questions about the recent administration's actions, his job, what his job entails, what vetting is, how that whole process goes, and I think some of you might be very surprised at some of the answers. So, without further ado, here is Joe. Okay, Joe. Well, hey, thanks very much for being on my Sensibly Speaking podcast. Really appreciate your time. Could we start off by first introducing who you are and what your role is in regards to immigration matters?
Sure. I've been working with various nonprofits, various organizations, mostly around refugee resettlement on and off for about 8 years now. Working with them long term as they've already come into the United States and acclimated, and then more short term bringing them like straight out of the airport and resettling them and getting them going in their early days in the United States.
Okay, great. So you're very focused then on the refugee part of the immigration issue.
Right, but there's a lot of overlap with the experiences, and some of the processes are also overlapping as well.
Right. Well, I've got so many questions for you on this topic, because this is, I imagine you've noticed that this is an extremely hot topic issue.
Right. Absolutely.
With this administration.
Yeah.
What sort of, in your role in working with refugees, first off, maybe I should ask you about this 2-year vetting thing that is talked about in the media. Mm-hmm. I have done an earlier podcast regarding the subject of immigration, which mainly concentrated on the 11 million illegal immigrants who are in the country and the fact that they are a major part of the workforce, that there's a lot of misconceptions about how and what they contribute to our economy and the benefits that they get and that sort of thing. But on the refugee end, let's talk about this specific part of this. What is this 2-year vetting process? What does this entail? And is it really a secure thing? Should people really be as concerned as they seem to be about the security of people coming in the country?
Honestly, the term 2-year vetting process is kind of a misnomer in my experience, because each and every person is different. And I've worked with people who have been waiting 20 years to come to the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a shocking number. It's crazy. And so when people say it takes decades, it can take decades. There's people that who are in pretty dire situations overseas who are expedited for sure. But even then, maybe on the short end, you're looking at 18 months. So it really differs by person. Within the actual process, it's a lengthy process, so I'll give you the highlights. Basically, a person has to identify or apply for refugee status with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. this person is then vetted by the United Nations team on the ground. What they're doing is they're collecting their biographical information, so who they are, where they're from, what their situation is, why they think that they are a refugee, why they're applying. From there, if they're approved and designated as a refugee, that does not necessarily mean you're going on the next plane to America. What
Right.
that means is that it's simply a designation by the United Nations saying this person has been approved as a refugee. We recognize that something caused them to have to leave their home country.
Okay.
From there, the person would then, there's a waiting list. And from there, the person would be eventually, if they're coming to the United States, shifted to our State Department. And within that process, you're going through biographical information again. There is some difference there with as far as Syrian and Iraqis. We've actually put in specific steps just for those nationalities. But the highlights are is you're going over biographical information. You're looking at who this person says they associate with, their political parties, their religious affiliations, their affiliations socially. You're doing interviews with people, trying to see what this person is into. On top of that, you are searching huge criminal databases, Interpol. You're looking at Department of Homeland Security databases. You're looking at counter-terrorism center databases. You're looking at State Department databases. They're looking through records captured, like criminal records captured in Iraq after the fall of the Saddam Hussein government. They're looking at every level of this person's story. And if at any time there's an inconsistency with the story or a new piece of information is revealed, the whole process starts over again. So if you say, oh, actually, you know, I did go to this political party's meeting back like 3 years ago, they're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to investigate that. You sit back down. You're not going anywhere. If there's any causes for the investigators to say like, this person has too many ifs, they'll just cancel the whole application right off the bat.
Wow. It must be somewhat frustrating to work in your line of business where you do this full time and see as much as you've seen over the years and then see it displayed in such a blasé sort of manner in the media that, you know, where the president himself stands up and says, you know, yes, we're letting in anybody and everybody, you know, these Republicans and these people who get on these talk shows just, oh yeah, we have open borders. Anybody can come in and there's no vetting and there's no looking and there's no nothing. And we're just inviting terrorism. And your day-to-day is, what? That's not the case at all.
Yeah.
What do you guys talk about amongst yourselves with this sort of thing? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, within the circles, it's a lot of disbelief that it's treated so cavalierly, and that it outright lies at times about what this process looks like, and that it's, you know, something that is treated as if it's, you know, nothing, that there's no vetting process, or that I think the thing personally that gets to me so much is that it's treated as if these are people who have economic reasons, strictly economic reasons, or have, you know, little reason to want to come to the United States other than to cause us harm.
Right.
If you sat down and met these people and talked to them, I guarantee you 1000% for 5 minutes, you would say, wow, this person's not going to do anything to anybody except get a job and, you know, try to make their life better.
Right. What sort of circumstances do you see come across your plate as to why people want to get out of the country that they're in? Which, by the way, you know, for anybody who even invests 10 seconds in thinking about this, is a gigantic huge change in your life. I mean, you are literally upending yourself and leaving everything, your entire culture, your entire history, in order to come to a foreign country and live the rest of your life. I mean, that itself should tell you you're talking about somebody who's in a fairly desperate situation.
Yeah. Well, the reasons run the gamut. The United Nations designates a refugee as someone who is fleeing their homeland because of persecution or a fear of persecution based on their nationality, religion, ethnicity, political party affiliation. There's a list of about 7 reasons that are usually designated. So the reasons can run the gamut. Excuse me. And but you see with some populations, I'll speak to the Bhutanese, which aren't really mentioned as a refugee population in mainstream media, but the Bhutanese are one of America's biggest populations that we've resettled. In fact, it's been, in some respects, called a successful resettlement. Basically, there was a group of people, mostly along ethnic lines, who were living in Nepal. They were encouraged to come to Southwest Bhutan many years ago, decades ago, and they lived there for a long time. And after a while, there was a wave of nationalism, sound familiar? And the king of Bhutan said, well, we're going to make these people who haven't integrated into our society integrate into our society. One thing led to another. The groups of originally Nepalese folks were kicked out of Bhutan. Nepal said, we don't want them. Bhutan said, they can't come to us. So they were literally effectively stateless. And so at that point, where do you go?
Right.
So those are the folks who have been sitting in camps for 20, 25 years.
Wow.
So that's one reason. You do see other people who, a lot of ethnic violence, a lot of religious violence, who fled for those reasons. So yeah, it really runs the gamut.
And by ethnic or religious violence, do I have this understanding right then that we're talking about people who are having violence committed against them or potentially committed against them simply because of their religion or who they are, who they were born as, their ethnicity?
Yeah, basically. That sums it up pretty well. It's a little bit of usually you hear it, the two are meshed in together, religion and ethnicity. So it's kind of hard sometimes to suss out one from the other. But essentially, yes, it's violence or fear of violence.
Okay. But basically, I mean, the bottom line is they're, for some reason connected with who they are or what they believe, they're literally no longer safe within the country that they're in.
Yeah. Or they feel as if they're not safe.
Yeah. Okay. And that's the process, is actually vetting to make sure that is the case before that's why they're given a status of refugee, is because somebody has looked that over objectively against whatever checklists and information they can get on this person, and they go, yeah, you're right. We're going to call you a refugee because we agree you're not safe there.
Yeah. That's essentially it. Yeah.
Okay. So then in terms of, now let's take a little bit more critical look at this, because I know, that this isn't, we don't want to give the impression that it's just an open door policy. Anybody can be given refugee status. What sort of things would cause a person to not get refugee status, or how, what kind of percentages are we talking about that come across your plate?
As far as people that don't get refugee status.
Yeah. How many people, do you know, and maybe in broad strokes, maybe, or at least as far as your experience goes, how many people apply for it and get rejected?
Yeah, I don't really have those kind of numbers in front of me. I will say that there are people who, you just really need to show that it's because of who you are as a person. And this is a slightly different thing than, internally displaced people who are just fleeing a war.
Mm.
Maybe something to liken it to is when investigators are investigating a hate crime, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to prove intent. You have to prove that it's connected somehow to who the person is.
Right.
So that's what I would say to that.
Okay, fair enough. And now, in terms of, you mentioned that Syria and Iraq, I think it was you said, have specific higher requirements in order for people to come over here. Like what sort of things? How does this impact the time it takes for them to get over here, and what sort of things are we looking at? I mean, you compared it to all the databases, for example, but what else?
Well, yeah, again, there's rumors that investigators are going so far now as to ask for passwords for social media accounts to check applicants' social media accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they are scrubbing social media accounts, looking for any kind of red flags there, affiliations or things that people are saying online. In addition to that, it's not so much extra things that they're doing, it's multiple levels of the same thing.
Oh.
So what they're doing is like, okay, so if you look at someone from Bhutan, for example, they would be processing them through the vetting process like anyone else. But then once it gets to an Iraqi or a Syrian, they're looking at DHS, they're looking at State Department, they're looking at Interpol, and then they're collaborating with foreign governments, intelligence agencies to really extra make sure that this person doesn't have any connections. I mean, it gets to a point where the feeling I've gotten is that you're looking for extra places to look.
Mm.
Is how it's really coming across from what I've seen on this end. And again, they're looking through captured databases of fingerprint records, criminal records back in Iraq. So these are extra steps that you really don't hear about from other nationalities.
Okay. And it has to do with the country that they're coming from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So okay, so we're tightening down in those two areas specifically. I'm just looking at people there's this, I don't know, there's a kind of well, let me ask you this. There's a kind of paranoia almost that has been inculcated in the United States thinking through media and through political action. Do you think from your experience that that's warranted?
The fear of refugees?
Yeah.
No. No. I truly struggle to figure out what the issue is.
Huh.
I understand the fear of the unknown. Everybody has the fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And to protect privacy, the refugee resettlement process has been largely in the dark because these are people who are vulnerable coming into a new society, a new culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's been a lot of opacity as far as the process. But by far and large, when it comes to refugees, no, I don't understand the fear. These are people who have been thoroughly vetted. I mean, these are people who have been waiting years, sometimes decades to come here.
Right. It seems to me that it would be a fairly difficult strategy for a terrorist group to go, okay, here's how we're going to do it. We're gonna get 10 of our guys, and we're gonna make it look like they are fleeing for refugee status.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that it would take so much work to set up those people's lives to make it look like they're fleeing for their lives. get
Right.
them refugee status, get them through the vetting process, get them here so that they can, create some Al Qaeda cell or something, or ISIS cell here in the United States, when it's so uncertain that any of those people are going to ever get here through this process, or the length of time it will take. I mean, we're talking about it would have to, you'd be thinking in very long-term strategies,
Mm-hmm.
which is not to say people don't do that or
Mm-hmm.
that it's impossible, but it just seems like the road of most effort. Whereas it seems like there would be, there would be easier ways to get people here than through the refugee process.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the numbers that's not really ever talked about in the media is that so we have about roughly 60 million refugees worldwide right now.
Yeah.
Definitely the most in the post-war period. Um, Less than half of 1% of those refugees get resettled in the United States.
Right.
So I mean, what you're talking about for, a cell to operate, I mean, is I'm just doing some quick calculator math
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
I haven't done this yet. So.
Sure. Well, it's quite a small percentage of people, and again, we're talking about, when you apply for refugee status, I don't think this is really broadly understood. Like, for example, when you're in a foreign country like Iraq, Syria, Iran, Somalia, uh,
Mhm.
Bhutan, when you apply for refugee status, you have to do that with the United Nations. There is zero guarantee that, when you begin that process, you're going to end up in the United States. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting to is that this idea that there will be terror cells coming here wholesale. I
Right.
mean, where's the guarantee of that? Where is that fear coming from? For anyone that actually looks at the process, it doesn't compute. I mean, and that's just getting here. That's
Right.
not even getting your tools, quote unquote, that you would need to perpetrate any kind of terror act. That's not even getting the support which I would suppose you would have to raise here in the States. I mean, and you'd have to somehow slip past all the domestic surveillance that our security apparatus puts on foreign nationals. I mean,
Right.
it's a ludicrous idea.
Right. Well, thank you for putting it that bluntly, because I, I've kind of had that idea, but I haven't been able to talk to anybody until now who's been able to confirm some of this for me.
Right,
Because it is difficult to get it clear through the media,
right.
and I don't. Why do you think that is? What's your take on that?
Oh, as far as getting to the media, I would guess in a nutshell, I mean, it's pretty specific numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little bit too technical. It doesn't make for a very sexy soundbite to say, less than 1% of all refugees make it into the United States.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mouthful. So it's a little bit more impressive to talk about vetting and security measures and counterterrorism, and that kind of detail gets lost in the wash. And let's be honest, our media is not a bastion of critical thinking.
That is very true, unfortunately. And what has come down to your level so far with this administration, if anything, in terms of extreme vetting? What is has that does that mean anything, or is that just political rhetoric?
Um, on the local level, no, that doesn't mean too much, to be honest.
Okay.
Um, that doesn't really affect a local site except for who they're bringing in. And something we haven't talked about yet is that a lot of the cases, especially amongst the Syrians, the Iraqis, that are coming in, they're high priority cases. There's many things that could make for a high priority case.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah.
Sure. So the United Nations can, along with our government, set a priority case.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the more common priority cases you see is somebody who is like a single woman, a single mother of multiple
Okay.
children. Maybe her husband has been killed. Maybe they're no longer together. Something about that case makes it a high priority case. Other cases you see are where there's like direct violence perpetrated against an individual, or an individual has reason to fear ongoing violence.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what would make up a high priority case. The other one that we see pretty often on the local level is medical cases. People who,
Oh, okay.
yeah, people who can't sustain themselves in a refugee camp. It's not possible. So that's another thing that you see pretty often. So as far as people coming here, um, you know, you see the high priority cases, and I mean, you see people in wheelchairs, you see people who are diabetic, you see people, who are missing limbs. They don't really scream terrorist.
Yeah, well, exactly. I was just going to say that doesn't sound exactly like they're, guy coming over here in a wheelchair.
Right. I mean, obviously it can come in any form, but it's not this image that you would maybe garner from the media of a guy and a stereotypical terrorist
Right.
running through the streets of any American city.
Well, exactly. And I actually have seen memes that, have perpetrated that idea, that you see these images of the big bulky guys, and yeah, these are, refugees, and just like, yeah, really. Let me ask you this, and then we'll move on to something else I wanted to get into. What has been your thoughts and those of your coworkers and the people that are rubbing elbows with on a day-to-day with the current administration's attitude towards immigration and refugees? What do you guys talk about with this?
I think amongst the people who work with refugees and immigrants on a daily basis, that there's just, I really try to figure out how to sum it up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of just disbelief and a lot of heartbreak that somebody or people could be so purposely ignorant and so unable to see the actual humanity of the problem, that, you know, despite every single fact raised up, showing that these are people who just want better lives or peaceful lives, that it's ignored and twisted into something. Just, it's an abomination.
Yeah, it must be rough. It must be rough because you guys clearly are not. I don't imagine that you're in the job for the big paycheck. I mean, you obviously want to have to help people to do the kind of work that you do, and it can't be easy to see the kind of stories that come across your desk, day in and day out, and then see the level of hatred and unthinking bigotry that goes into a lot of Americans, far too many Americans, who just, no, I hate them all. Let's keep them all out. Lock down the borders. Forget all those people. I mean, that must be rough.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you you read that kind of stuff in the media, you see it on TV, you hear it on the radio, and you go and you work with those same people. So yeah, it's if I had to sum it up, I would say it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's talk about the other half of this, which is something I think is crucial to solving the whole immigration issue, which is, okay, you can't just build walls around your country and say no one gets to come in, and
Right.
no one, because that, and no one gets to leave either. I mean, what is that, right? That's the most unrealistic position you can possibly have. People need to come in and out of countries every day, all day.
Right.
So then it becomes a matter of the filtering process. How do you filter people in? And this seems to be the big issue. Yet, if we had a path to citizenship where, when people get in, they can become American citizens in a fairly straightforward and easy to understand manner, then the illegal immigrant problem, right? Because they are illegal, because they're undocumented, they're not here, they shouldn't be here, but yet they are, would go away overnight. Because we could then go, okay, you are okay to be here, and okay, no, you're definitely not okay to be here through the path to citizenship process. But no one talks about that. I'm curious, first off, I guess, for refugees, is there a path to citizenship?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Not really. Yeah, it's something else we haven't discussed and isn't really discussed in the media. Is that I'll be very, very clear. Refugees from the day, actually before the day they arrive in America, are authorized to work here.
Okay.
They could get a job as soon as they step off the plane. Furthermore, refugees are what you would call a alien permanent resident. So there's somebody who is guaranteed to be here into perpetuity, but they're also recognized as an alien, an immigrant. So as far as citizenship goes, a refugee, a year after they arrive, they're required to apply for a green card. And this makes them this is a traditional residency check mark to make someone permanent. This opens up some more doors for them as far as restrictions on, coming or going out of the United States. So that happens a year after they arrive. 5 years after they arrive, they're eligible to apply for naturalization.
Okay.
In which case they become a citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
do you see from your experience the majority of people going through those processes and becoming citizens, or what do you see with that?
Traditionally, it's not been something that's been utilized. I've had friends, I've had coworkers who have at times questioned the reasoning behind becoming a citizen. And the reason is that a lot of people don't see the incentive. They say, oh, I can vote and that's it if I become a citizen. But the one thing that people haven't really talked about until recently is that as a citizen, you can't be deported. Green card
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
that's
yeah.
kind of the point,
And green card holders can be deported. So yeah, needless to say, there's been a huge uptick in interest in naturalization recently.
Well, I'll tell you, if I immigrated to another country, it would be at the top of my list until I got that citizenship status. I would be unflaggingly pursuing that endeavor for exactly that reason. I want to know that when I've arrived in another place where I'm going to spend the rest of my life, that I'm going to be okay to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is a gigantic problem for people who come here, from other places. Now, we talk a lot about refugees from Europe. That seems to be the when you look at history, the historical record of where people come from, a lot of refugees from that area. I mean, you go back to World War II. Now, in the 70s, I think there was a gigantic influx from Southeast Asia because of the Vietnam War. But is that the only place that they come from? I mean, you mentioned Bhutan as something nobody talks about. South America, Eurasia, what about those places?
Yeah, so primarily, like I said, Bhutan is one of the bigger sites that we see people from. But the United States also still will take people from Southeast Asia occasionally. You see a good amount of people from Burma, Myanmar. You see a good amount of people still coming in from well, not a good amount of people, but you do see people coming in from Russia, China, usually asylum seekers.
Mm.
Um, you do, on the local level through the refugee sites, you do see a lot of people coming from East Africa, specifically Eritrea, Somalia, down more into sub-Saharan Africa. You see a lot of people coming from Congo. Um, so, a lot of mix as far as South America goes, more into Caribbean. You see Cubans coming in under a special program. So it really is a global thing where you see people coming from all different all different corners of the world.
Right. I wanted to mention or bring that up because I was curious about, again, I don't need exact numbers on this, but again, from your experience, like, there's this idea that, these 7 countries we put this travel ban on, that there's an idea, I think, in some people's heads that there's a ton of people from those countries just dying to get here.
Mm-hmm.
Would that statement match up with your experience?
Well, yes and no. I mean,
Okay.
like I said, there's about 60 million refugees estimated by the UN right now.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like countries that are have a lot of refugees, definitely Syria, definitely Somalia, Iraq, but you also see a lot of people again from Congo who are fleeing violence that happened about a decade ago, maybe a little bit less, who are trying to come to the United States as well.
Okay.
So yes, there are a good amount of refugees coming from those specific countries,
Okay.
but there are a lot of refugees in general. It's a huge pot of people.
Okay. How is it determined where they end up? And I ask this question because I'm sitting here thinking about Somalians. I used to live in before I lived here in Denver. I lived in Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
and there was apparently Twin Cities. Minneapolis, St. Paul is like the place for Somalians to go.
Yeah.
How much do they, once they move here, can they just kind of, they can just kind of go anywhere, or are they placed in an area specifically, or is it just kind of, okay, welcome to America, have at it? Like,
Yeah.
how does that work once they get here?
Okay. Try to think of the best way to describe it. So, so after the vetting process and after the State Department is, thoroughly looked through their history, they've okayed them to come. The refugees individually are going through health screenings, and then they're going through cultural orientation. About the time of their cultural orientation, they learn where they're going to be resettled in the United States. So they're looking at 2 things when they look at that resettlement. They're looking at ties. Who do the refugees know in the United States? These could be family members, friends, neighbors from back home. The reason for this is that acculturation occurs a lot quicker and a lot smoother if you have community support. If you had nothing and you were moved to Russia and you didn't speak the language, you didn't know the customs, but you had a family member or a neighbor who had been there for 7 years already, you're going to have a lot easier time having someone nearby who can help you out.
Right.
So that's one thing they look at when they choose an actual city or an actual site to send people to. The other reason is medical concerns. So some cities are better equipped to deal with certain medical concerns than others. So that's another factor at play.
Interesting. Okay. Speaking of communities of people, this is another touchstone of maybe some warranted concern on the part of some people, especially when they look to some of the more salacious or wild stories that come out of Europe, is this point of Sharia law,
Mm-hmm.
right? People, Muslims who get into these communities, and there's this narrative that they want Sharia law, they want to live under Sharia law, they want to and I think in England I've seen a couple stories about these communities where they no-go zones, I think they're called.
Mm-hmm.
Is that addressed at all in the vetting process, or in the process of resettling somebody? Do these things come up at all? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that's Sharia law. Okay. Yeah, as far as people who are coming here, refugees, what they're going through in the vetting process is also includes, cultural orientation. Like I said, this is what American culture is like, but also they're signing agreements, documents saying, I will abide by the laws of the United States of America.
Okay.
So that's one thing there. The other thing that once they come into the United States, to the cultural orientation is obviously sped up quite a bit because they're not only learning about it, but they're in the culture. As far as Sharia law goes specifically, or we could broaden it out and say adapting or trying to install your culture's customs or laws into another culture, you do see a lot of people who try to maintain their lifestyle, and I will say it's a lifestyle in the United States, and by far and large, it's really interesting to see how people try to do that very adamantly at first, and then as they start to learn what life is like in the United States, they back off from it and they say, "Oh, I'm going to have to adapt. I'm going to have to adjust." And I tell newly resettled refugees this all the time. I say, you can't take the laws, the customs from your culture and just dump them into another culture. I know you want to. I would want to do that too. I would want to have what's familiar, but you're playing by a new set of rules now. And so you do see this adjustment over time where people take a step back and say, oh, I do have to do it this way, or I have to find a new way to do things.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, let me ask you this. I've been asking a lot of questions about the media and bad portrayals and things like that. What do you think are the real problems when it comes to refugees? What should they be talking about in the media? What should the politicians be concerned about?
Sure. That's a big question.
Take your time. I'd really like to know.
Yeah, I would say off the top of my head that in some respects that the refugees are kind of dumped off in a way. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, like, hey, good luck, bye. But let me paint you a picture of what it can look like. So let's say you have a family of 5, and you're a single parent. The struggles that refugees go through are not too different than anybody else living in the United States who is living in poverty. So when they come in, they have a very limited amount of money that they can draw on. That is actually a loan from the United States government. They are forced to pay that back over time. And this loan for each person is, roughly about $1,200. So for each individual, adult or child, you get $1,200 to start your life in America. So a family of 5, you're looking at $6,000.
Yeah.
That is all the money you have. Now, a refugee resettlement site would take that money and they will manage that money for you until you are able to adjust to the culture and to what your needs in the culture are. So from that money, the refugee resettlement site is paying your bills because the refugees are signing documents saying, I understand I am legally responsible for paying my bills. By using that loan money, they are in effect paying their own bills with their own money. So they're using the money for their rent, their utilities, their clothing, their startup food.
Yeah.
It gets expensive very quickly.
Yeah.
And suddenly that $6,000 is looking very thin. And it happens a lot quicker than people anticipate. And so if you can imagine, we go back to the hypothetical of being in Russia and not knowing the language or the culture. I say to you, a month and a half after you arrive in the United States, hey, Chris, it's time for you to get a job. Here's this job where you're going to be making $9.50 an hour, and good luck. And if you've ever been on public benefits before, you understand that the second that you start to work, a lot of your benefits are gone.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly a refugee who might not speak the language too well, might not understand the culture too well, is suddenly cut off of all assistance, and they're making $9.50 an hour.
Yeah.
If you're a single parent, again, you're a high priority resettlement case, that is crazy. You've got 4 kids with you, and you're making $9.50 an hour. So the real issue to me is that not that people are coming, or that people are coming with a some kind of like skewed sense of what America is or what they're going to do in America. The problem to me is that our government is willingly bringing people here with very minimal resources to start their lives. These are people, it's said all the time, these are people who work hard, and they work hard unflinchingly. I talk to employers, local employers all the time, and they say, please send us more. Send us more of your people.
Wow.
If you talk to any refugee resettlement site in the country and you say, do you have willing employers who work with you? They will answer you, yes, I guarantee you.
Okay. Okay, good. Good. Well, that puts a bit of a different perspective on the whole thing. And I wanted to get some boots on the ground views about all of this. So I really appreciate, you giving us this time. Is there anything else that we should be talking about on this issue that we haven't yet covered here?
I think that in general, when dealing with other cultures, other religions, international populations, the most helpful thing you can always ask yourself, and I really wish with every ounce of my being that the media, our politicians, the American public was asking this, is what are we assuming? What are we assuming about these people? And that does not make us naive to ask that question. That makes us critical thinkers. And with critical thought can come real progress and real solutions.
Yeah.
What are we assuming about refugees, immigrants? Once you start to ask that question, you can actually have a real dialogue. With a real dialogue comes a real solution.
Excellent. Excellent point. Okay, well, thank you very much, Joe, for taking some time today and talking about this. I definitely hope that some people's minds will be opened a bit as a result of some of what we've talked about, and at least be able and willing to look at, maybe some of what we're being presented with might not necessarily be all there is to the story.
Absolutely.
And that was Joe Sack. I hope you guys learned something from that. I know I certainly did. I found my conversation with him to be quite interesting. And of course, between that and the research that is 10 seconds, it's such an easy Google search to find this information that there is literally no excuse to be ignorant on this subject or to be extreme on this subject. Refugees are not the threat that they have been painted to be in the media. I'm sorry, but they're simply not. The facts don't support such a conclusion. Empty rhetoric that is really fear-mongering, hate-mongering, bigotry, and even racism is the reason that people are so freaked out here in this country. And I'm just going to tell you right now that the reports coming out of Europe about refugee problems are greatly exaggerated. Do some research. Take some time. If you're that concerned about this, go get some facts, okay? It's not that every refugee is Snow White or Prince Charming, but how could they be given their circumstances? They are poor people for the most part who are not getting much of a break, and trying to come into the United States is all but impossible for most of them. And we're certainly not helping. And for a country that was founded on the principle of helping, and all I have to do is point to the Statue of Liberty and the inscription thereupon, I think that we should have a definite attitude adjustment in this country on this subject. So, thank you very much for coming around. I welcome any and all feedback, good, bad, sideways. And of course, please consider supporting this channel and my efforts on this by joining me on Patreon. I very much appreciate all the support that I get from you guys, and I could always use some more to keep this thing going. Thanks a lot, and I will see you guys next week.